Greetings and welcome for all of you tuned in. You're watching TMH's Daily English News. As we move on to our headlines for today, new evidence has emerged of atrocities in the Tigray region as UN investigators battle for access. Peace won't come easy despite growing hopes for negotiations, and UNFPA says conflict fueling sexual violence in Ethiopia's Tigray region. As we move on to our main updates, new evidence emerges of atrocities in Tigray as UN investigators battle for access. As investigators struggle to gain access to sites of atrocities in the northern region of Ethiopia, new accounts are emerging of previously undocumented cases of sexual violence, torture, and mass detentions within the Tigray region. Timnit Bayru has more on this update.
Interviews with The Globe and Mail have uncovered horrific new evidence of sexual assaults on young men in western Tigray, a region where human rights groups have already documented systematic pattern of ethnic cleansing targeting Tigrayan residents. The latest cases are in addition to reports of sexual violence against Tigrayan women and girls. The Globe interviewed 4 young Tigrayan men who said they were tortured and raped after trying to escape from a mass detention camp in Humera, a town in western Tigray. They eventually reached Sudan, where they were interviewed by phone. The Globe is not providing their full names because of the risk of retaliation against them and the stigma they would face as male rape victims. Mahari, 19, said he and his 27-year-old cousin Brhana were detained by Amhara militiamen on April 11th. They had been hiding in Humera as many of their family members were killed or forced to flee to Sudan, but neighbors informed on them. The militiamen took them to Beit Hinsat, one of the several detention camps in Humera. According to the former detainees, who had also managed to flee to Sudan, more than 3,000 Tigrayans were held in the camp. There are beatings and tortures every day, 36-year-old Nugus told The Globe. They would not give any food. They wanted us to die starving, he said. Detainees would only eat food if some kind of Amhara neighbors brought food, but it's not easy for them to get the food in. In the community, they often get isolated for pitying Tigrayans. Mahari and his cousins spent a month in the camp. On the morning of May 8th, they decided to try to escape. We could not bear the hunger and the beatings any longer, he said. They and 2 other detainees headed to Sudan, but when they were within an hour's walk of the border, 9 Amhara militiamen found them. They beat us until we bled, Mahari said. They tied our hands and legs in a torture position. The 4 men said the militiamen called their commanders to ask if they could execute them. Hours went by with no decision, but the beatings continued. When the sun went down, the militiamen stopped beating them and began raping them. Each of them took turns, Mahari said, speaking through tears. I don't want to remember what they did. I feel sick and angry whenever the memories come. They did to us the unimaginable, and then they urinated on us. I just don't want to remember it. I would have preferred if they shot us. The 3 other men shared similar accounts with The Globe. After raping them, the militiamen tied them up and abandoned them. The men said they were rescued at night by other Tigrayans fleeing to Sudan. Mahari and the other rape victims say they are suffering from both physical and mental trauma because of what happened. Mahari is experiencing bladder dysfunction and has frequent suicidal thoughts. Due to the intense social stigma that plagues male rape victims and the extreme homophobia in the community, he kept his ordeal to himself until his health worsened. For a long time, I could not even tell what happened to my doctor, he said. Nobody knew except those who were raped alongside me. I was only asking the doctors to treat my feet, which were broken during the torture. But when I could no longer hold my urine, I needed to tell my doctor. Western Tigray has been the scene of some of the worst atrocities since the war began in November 2020. A joint investigation by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International concluded that hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans have been violently expelled from the region by ethnic Amhara militias and the Ethiopian army and allied Eritrean troops in a campaign that could amount to genocide. Researchers at Ghent University in Belgium have estimated that as many as 500,000 people have died from war-related causes in Tigray, which is under an Ethiopian government blockade for most of the war. Investigations have been limited by government restrictions. The United Nations Human Rights Council voted last December to launch a 1-year investigation into suspected massacres and other crimes in Ethiopia committed since the beginning of the war in Tigray. The Ethiopian government fought the UN proposal, tried unsuccessfully to block its funding, and has not yet granted approval for the 3-member investigation panel to travel into the country's northern regions. After threatening to deny the investigators any access to Ethiopia, the government last week allowed them to visit the capital, Addis Ababa. But with only a few months remaining in the panel's mandate, the government has still not agreed to let the investigators travel into the reported atrocity site. In a statement Tuesday, the panel said it had reiterated its requests for access. It said it hopes for unhindered access without delay so that it may visit sites and speak freely and privately with survivors, witnesses, and other persons of interest. In a July 24 statement, Tigray's government said it worried that Ethiopia would try to control the scope of the latest UN investigation. The Globe sent questions to the UN-appointed investigators about the details of their work, but they responded only by repeating the Tuesday statement.
Welcome back, and thank you, Timnit Bayru, for that further update. As we move on to our next news, despite hopes for peace talks between Ethiopia's federal government and the government of Tigray, analysts say it won't come easy. Tigray government representative Fisaha Asgarom told VOA that he is no longer optimistic that talks will happen anytime soon. Let's take a listen.
I cannot say that today, because at that time we were told by interlocutors, countries like the United States, the African Union, all of them, that basic services will start any minute now. We were counting not days but hours, that there will be some move. Now it looks like the Addis Ababa government have decided against it.
The federal government has cut telecom, banking services, fuel supplies, and prevented humanitarian aid from reaching the Tigray region, and analysts agree that peace talks are currently likely to go ahead if these basic services are not restored to the region. But even if that does happen, analysts say that there are still other sticking issues that need to be attended to. Let's take a listen.
It's not clear that Tigray's leadership or its people would be willing to accept the downsizing, let alone the abolition of that force. But equally, it's not at all clear the federal government would accept Tigray to become a fully functioning part of the federation and its political system, whilst it was still in possession of such a large and capable fighting force.
Our next update on UNFPA says conflict fueling sexual violence in Ethiopia's Tigray region. And according to UNFPA, many girls in Tigray are struggling with the lasting impact of sexual violence. We tried to flee on the back of trucks, but they caught us. They took me away, raped me, and left me in the bushes, one of the survivors, Mahalit, says, and she was just 17 when she fled home in November of 2021 to escape the conflict raging in Ethiopia's northern region of Tigray. She didn't regain consciousness until the next day. Alone, terrified, and in pain, she said, "There was no one around to help me." Without access to sexual and reproductive or any health care, by the time she chose to speak with UNFPA, Mahalit was 7 months pregnant by her rapist. Mahalit found her way alone to the Sawakar Fort camp in Ma'ala for internally displaced people, having lost her family in the chaos of the hostilities, malnourished, exhausted, and consumed with anxiety for the future that now lay ahead of her. She said she was relieved to be able to tell her story to a counselor at the UNFPA who supported her in a friendly space for women and girls. Mahalit is just one of the unknowable number of young girls desperately trying to navigate a situation that they had no hand in creating, forced to endanger their lives in order to stay alive. This isolation is common among the survivors of sexual violence, said Sanait Gabra, who manages gender-based violence and CASE is one of the friendliest spaces where survivors can access psychosocial support. She added that these survivors become invisible in the camp and resort to commercial sex and other activities just to merely survive. More than 80% of remaining health facilities in Tigray don't have mental health capacity. There are about 130 children living in the Sawak Arfor camp without any family. Most are teenagers, like Mahalit, and Sanait indicated that some are resorting to transactional sex in exchange for food or a meager amount of cash as well. Ethiopian Human Rights Commission releases a report on the ongoing human rights situations in the war-torn Ethiopia, and as Ethiopia continues to face instability and conflict in many of its regions, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has published an in-depth report this July detailing its findings in regards to human rights violations, key areas for concern, positive developments, and recommendations for the period of June 2021 all the way to June 2022. The report does detail violations in almost all regions of Ethiopia, from the well-documented attacks on the northern region of Tigray, as well as the alleged massacres that took place in the western region of Oromia. The annual Human Rights Report is the first to be released by EHRC since its formation. Back since the war on Tigray began in November 2020, there have been restrictions on humanitarian aid, food to the region, leading to the most severe. Special Representative for the Horn of Africa, Annette Weber, UN Under-Secretary General and Special Envoy to the Horn of Africa, Hannah Tata, as well as Ambassador of Canada, Italy, and the Deputy Head of Mission of the UK, were in Ma'ala yesterday, where they met and held discussions with the regional president, Debretsion Gebremichael. The envoys agreed that a swift restoration of electricity, telecom, and banking and other basic services in Tigray is essential for the people of Tigray, as recognized in earlier discussions with the Ethiopian government, as the statement released afterwards said. The statement did add that with this security assurance given, there should be no obstacles for the restoration of services to begin and be impacted immediately. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.